I had always been the type of person who sought adventure, the kind of person who thrives on the unknown. When my friend suggested a road trip across the Midwest, I was all in. The open road, the sense of freedom, what could go wrong? We were a group of three, me, Ethan, and Sarah, all in our late 20s, eager to explore some of the most isolated parts of America. It was a Thursday afternoon when we left Chicago, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. We didn't have a specific route in mind, just the vague idea of heading south toward Missouri, maybe ending up in the Ozarks. The idea was to stop wherever we felt like it, explore the desolate stretches of road, the forgotten towns. What better way to bond, right? The first few hours went by uneventfully, gas stations, small-town diners, and the occasional stretch of empty highway. But it was when we hit the backroads, just past a place called Razor's Edge on the map, that things started to take a turn. I can't pinpoint exactly when it began, but there was a strange shift in the air. The roads got narrower, the trees denser, and the houses few and far between. We stopped to stretch our legs at a small pull-off, the only thing in sight for miles being an old, weathered barn. I remember laughing nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The first odd thing happened just before we left the pull-off. Ethan, who had been the most excited about this whole trip, came back from a quick walk toward the barn looking pale. His usual sarcastic grin was gone, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "You guys need to see this," he said, his voice low and tight. Curious, we followed him, our footsteps crunching over the gravel. As we approached the barn, I noticed something strange. The front door was ajar, and there was a faint smell in the air, something metallic, almost like old blood. We pushed the door open, and inside, it was a mess. It wasn't just the usual abandoned barn stuff, old hay, broken tools, and the like. There were strange markings on the floor, as though something had been dragged across it. The worst part, though, was the walls. They were covered in something that, at first glance, I assumed was paint, but then I saw it more clearly. Red streaks, and I mean streaks, as if someone had smeared it, splattered, all over the place. We all stood there, frozen, before Sarah finally spoke up. "This isn't funny, guys." I could hear her voice shaking, and I could feel my heart rate pick up too. Ethan tried to brush it off, making some joke about creepy abandoned places to ease the tension, but there was a crack in his voice. We left quickly, trying not to acknowledge the knot of dread that had formed in my stomach. But it didn't leave me. Something about that barn, the red marks, the smell, it felt like we had disturbed something. We continued driving for a while longer, but that sense of unease didn't go away. We ended up on a tiny back road, one that seemed to stretch on forever. The sun had fully set now, and the headlights of the car were the only thing illuminating the road ahead. Then, a figure appeared out of nowhere. We were traveling at a decent speed when I saw it, someone standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dark, like a shadow. I thought it was a trick of the headlights at first, but as we got closer, I realized it was a person. Standing perfectly still. I could feel my heart in my throat as we approached. Ethan slowed down. Should we stop? I wanted to say no. I wanted to keep driving, to keep my foot on the gas and never look back. But something made me nod, and before I knew it, we were pulling over. The figure didn't move. I rolled down the window, my hands trembling, and called out into the darkness. "Hey! Are you okay?" No answer. "Do you need help?" I asked again, a little more urgently. My voice felt small against the vast nothingness of the night. Still, nothing. Then, just as I was about to ask Ethan to drive away, the figure turned slowly, its head jerking toward us. It wasn't a person. At least, not anymore. I don't know how to describe what I saw. The face was wrong. Twisted. There was no human recognition in the features, just a grotesque imitation of a person. The eyes, dark, lifeless, looked right at me, but they didn't see me. They didn't know me. Without saying a word, it turned and began to walk away, stumbling into the woods off the side of the road. I felt frozen. Sarah was the first to react, her voice panicked. "We need to leave. Now." Ethan didn't need any further encouragement. He slammed the car into gear, and we sped off, the figure disappearing into the darkness as we looked back. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The eyes. The stillness. The way it moved, like it wasn't alive at all. Something about it felt wrong. Something about this road trip was already becoming more than just an adventure. Something was hunting us. We didn't talk much after that. The silence in the car felt suffocating, even though the air conditioning was running. Sarah had her arms crossed tightly, staring out the window, her face pale. Ethan kept glancing at the rearview mirror like he expected to see something following us. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same way. We kept driving, the road stretching on like some never-ending nightmare. The lights from our car illuminated the dark asphalt ahead, but the deeper we drove into the wilderness, the more oppressive the darkness felt. The trees began to crowd the road, their branches like gnarled hands reaching down to grab us. We didn't stop again until we reached a small town, a speck on the map. It was a place called Maple Hollow, and it didn't look like it had seen a tourist in years. The buildings were crumbling, with boarded-up windows and fading paint. We passed a few gas stations, all closed, and a diner that had a flickering neon sign, but the whole place felt lifeless, abandoned. Ethan suggested we stop for gas. Might as well, right? We don't know how much longer this road goes on. I agreed reluctantly. The emptiness of the place made my skin crawl, but my fuel gauge was edging toward empty, and we hadn't seen another soul in hours. We pulled into the only open station, the pump, a rusty relic of a bygone era. An old man was sitting on a rocking chair next to the station, his face hidden behind a thick beard. He barely acknowledged us when we got out of the car. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled like stale tobacco. "Got any room for gas?" Ethan asked, but the old man just grunted, slowly getting up. We didn't feel safe. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I watched him move. There was something wrong about him, something that didn't belong here. But it was his eyes that caught me, the same vacant, lifeless stare I had seen earlier in the woods. "Where are you folks headed?" the old man asked, his voice rasping like dry leaves. I didn't want to answer. The hairs on my arms prickled, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The question was too casual. Too much like the kind of thing someone would ask if they had been watching you for a while. "We're just passing through," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. I felt like I was trapped in this tiny, suffocating town with no way out. The old man nodded slowly, as if he already knew the answer. "You should leave, now," he said, his tone suddenly serious, his eyes locking with mine in a way that made my stomach churn. "This road, it ain't safe after dark. You don't want to be out here when it's too late." Ethan didn't seem to notice how strange the warning sounded. He just nodded and thanked him before filling up the tank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The old man didn't leave us, just sat back down in his chair, staring at us with those same empty eyes. It felt like we were trapped in a bad dream, one where everything was wrong but you couldn't wake up. Once the tank was full, we climbed back into the car, and I started the engine. I didn't want to leave, but I also didn't want to stay. The entire town felt like a shadow, a place that shouldn't exist. The moment we pulled away, I couldn't help but glance back at the gas station in the rearview mirror. The old man was still sitting in his chair, watching us leave. The road ahead felt darker than before, the trees now encroaching on either side. But something was different, something felt like it was watching us from the woods, like eyes hidden just out of sight. I couldn't explain it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We didn't make it much further. The car suddenly lurched, and the engine sputtered before dying altogether. "Shit," Ethan muttered, banging the steering wheel. "What the hell now?" We pulled over, the car dead on the side of the road. It wasn't the gas, we had just filled up. "Try to start it again," Sarah said, her voice shaking. I turned the key. Nothing. "We need to get out and check the engine," Ethan suggested. I didn't want to, but we didn't have a choice. We climbed out of the car and popped the hood. The air felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the span of a few minutes. I stood by the car, watching the trees. They were unnaturally still. Too still. That's when I heard it. A low sound, almost like a hum, coming from the woods. It was distant at first, but as we stood there, it grew louder. A high-pitched, unnatural buzzing sound that made my skin crawl. Ethan looked at me, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the trees, which now seemed to be moving, swaying unnaturally. Something was in those woods, something big, and it was getting closer. "Get in the car." "Now," I said, my voice cracking. We didn't need any more prompting. We scrambled into the car, slamming the doors shut. Ethan tried the engine again, but this time, the car roared to life, louder than usual, almost as if it was too alive. Without looking back, I slammed my foot on the gas, and we tore down the road, the buzzing sound still echoing in the distance, growing louder. And in the rearview mirror, there was something there, just for a second. Something following us. I don't know how long we drove, but the road seemed to stretch on forever. The buzzing sound, that awful, unnatural hum, faded into the background, but it didn't stop the tension in the car from growing. We were all silent, too afraid to speak, as if saying the wrong thing might invite whatever was out there to come for us. The trees on either side of the road loomed closer, the darkness swallowing everything beyond our headlights. Every turn, every bend felt like it was taking us further into some nightmare we couldn't escape. It was as if the road itself was conspiring against us, leading us deeper into a place that didn't belong. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, following us. But it was always just the endless, empty stretch of road. For a while, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just nerves. The weird encounter at the gas station, the figure in the woods, it was all adding up to a perfect storm of paranoia. Then, it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in the mirror. A shadow. Moving fast. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking, "do you see that?" He didn't respond immediately, but I could tell by the way his hands tightened on the wheel that he saw it too. The shadow was coming from behind, moving too quickly to be just another car. "Is it a truck?" Sarah asked, her voice tense. I shook my head. "No, it's something else." The shadow grew larger. Faster. My heart pounded in my chest. Whatever it wasn't a truck. The figure was running, or maybe something was running behind us, but it was moving too fast, too unnaturally fast. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at Ethan to drive faster, to get us out of there, but my mouth was dry. Then, a sharp sound, like something hitting the car. We all jumped. "Something's on the roof," Sarah yelled. I looked up. There was nothing there, just the empty night sky, but then I heard it again, scratching, scraping, something heavy dragging across the roof of the car. "Go faster," I shouted, panicking. Ethan slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car surging forward, but whatever it wasn't slowing down. The scraping intensified, like claws dragging across metal. We could feel the vibration through the car, and my stomach lurched as we swerved to avoid the trees. "Do you see it?" Ethan shouted. I couldn't. I couldn't see anything but the road ahead. I didn't want to look back. The scraping stopped suddenly, and for a moment, everything felt eerily still. The only sound was the roar of the engine. Then, with a bone-chilling thud, something slammed into the back of the car, throwing us all forward. The impact felt like we'd been hit by a freight train. Shit! Ethan swerved again, barely keeping control of the car as we fishtailed on the road. The back window cracked, spiderwebbing into a jagged pattern, and something heavy, something large, scratched down the rear bumper. "Get off! Get off!" Sarah screamed. I glanced back just in time to see a silhouette, massive, dark, and moving. It was there, standing on the edge of the road, a thing so tall, so unnatural in its proportions that I couldn't comprehend it. It was like a person, but stretched and warped, its limbs far too long, its skin pale and slick under the faint light of the headlights. And its eyes, those eyes. They glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the headlights in a way that made my blood run cold. It was watching us. "Go! Go!" I shouted. Ethan didn't need any more encouragement. He floored it, pushing the car harder, faster than I thought possible, as if the gas pedal could somehow outrun what was chasing us. But we weren't alone. I saw more of them. Shadows, figures, all around us, flickering in and out of view as the car tore through the darkness. They were fast, so fast. Running alongside us, keeping pace, but staying just out of sight. I could hear them now, footsteps. Their breathing. The strange clicking sound of something dragging behind them, as if they were all in pursuit. I wanted to scream, but my throat was too tight, my lungs too filled with terror. "Shit! We're not gonna outrun them!" Ethan shouted, panic seeping into his voice. Then, the car lurched again. This time, it wasn't the scraping on the roof. It was something pulling at the tires, pulling at the car itself, dragging us down. I turned to Sarah, who was clutching the door handle, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is happening? What are they?" But I couldn't answer her, because deep down, I knew we were no longer just running from something in the woods. It was following us, hunting us. And no matter how fast we went, no matter how much we pushed this old car to its limits, I knew we couldn't escape. The road seemed endless. We kept pushing forward, but the creatures were closer now, circling in on us. I saw one in the side mirror, its twisted face, its impossibly long arms reaching out, almost grabbing the car. I looked ahead again, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a sign. A town. We were close, but was it a town we could escape to? Or would it be another trap? Another place like Maple Hollow, where things didn't belong, where something far worse than we could ever imagine was waiting for us. There was only one way to find out. To keep driving. To keep running. The town came into view like a flickering mirage, distant but growing larger with every second. My heart pounded louder in my chest, drowning out the sound of the engine in the chaos outside. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or terrified. What if this place, whatever it was just another nightmare, another trap designed to lure us in? Is that it? Sarah gasped, her eyes fixed on the dim outline of buildings. Is that a town? I squinted through the windshield. I think so, it looks like it's the last place before we hit the real highway. Ethan didn't answer. He was too focused on the road, his knuckles white on the wheel, sweat beading on his forehead. He was driving faster now, faster than he should have, as if pushing the car to its limit might somehow make the nightmare go away. But no matter how fast we went, the figures on the side of the road kept pace with us. I could hear them now, their breaths in the air, their footsteps in the gravel. It was like they were surrounding us, closing in from every direction. I turned around again, just in time to see one of them leap across the road behind us, its grotesque body crashing into the trees on the opposite side. It was fast, too fast. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its limbs bending in ways that weren't human. Its eyes locked onto mine for just a moment, and I felt a cold, hollow shiver run through me. It knew I was watching. "Don't look back," Ethan shouted. "Whatever you do, don't look back." I nodded, trying to force myself to focus on the road ahead, but the fear was overwhelming. Every inch of my body screamed to turn and see what was closing in on us, but I couldn't. I had to trust that Ethan knew what he was doing. "Is there any other way out?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "I don't know. I don't know if there's any way out at all." There was a silence that stretched between us, filled only by the sound of the engine and the soft, almost rhythmic thumping of whatever was chasing us. It was like they were closing in, getting closer, but they weren't attacking yet. Not yet. It was as if they were playing with us, toying with us, dragging this out as long as they could. I could feel the tension in the car, thick and suffocating. I glanced at Ethan again, and saw the terror in his eyes, the same look I knew must have been in mine. He was pushing the car harder, trying to make it to the town, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. We were running out of time. We were running out of road. And then, just as I thought I saw a break in the trees, a small stretch of open road leading into the town, the car lurched again. The back tires screamed in protest, and the car swerved dangerously, nearly hitting a guardrail. "Damn it!" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. "Something's got us." I looked out the window, and my heart skipped a beat. There, in the trees beside us, I could see them clearly now. The creatures. There were dozens of them. No longer in the shadows, no longer half hidden in the woods. They were out in the open, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. Their eyes glowed, reflecting the light in sickening, predatory gleams. Some of them were standing still, watching us, while others moved, their bodies lurching unnaturally as if their joints were disconnected. They were closing in. Ethan slammed on the brakes, and the car came to a screeching halt, the tires spinning on the gravel. "Out! Get out! Now!" he yelled. I didn't even think. The adrenaline hit me like a jolt of electricity. I threw open the door, almost falling out of the car, and scrambled to my feet. My legs were weak, but I pushed forward, running toward the town, toward the lights. The others followed behind me, but I couldn't look back. I couldn't afford to waste a second. We ran, our footsteps pounding on the gravel road as the creatures closed in from all sides. The lights of the town were bright now, just ahead. But even as we neared it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The town felt too quiet. There were no cars, no voices, no movement. It was like we had stepped into some sort of ghost town. The buildings, once distant, were now towering over us, their windows dark and empty. No signs of life. "Where is everyone?" Sarah gasped, looking around in horror. I didn't answer. There were no answers. Just the overwhelming sense of being watched. And then I heard it, a low growl, deep in the shadows. I froze. The others did too. The growl echoed through the empty streets, sending chills down my spine. "We need to get inside," I whispered, but my voice felt weak. But just as I turned toward the nearest building, I saw something move in the darkness. A shadow, tall and twisted, standing in the doorway of what looked like an old church. It wasn't just any shadow. It was the same thing I had seen earlier, the thing that had been chasing us. Its form was impossibly tall, its limbs too long, too distorted. It tilted its head, its eyes glowing with that sickening light. I barely had time to react before it stepped into the light, blocking the doorway. "Run!" I screamed. But it was too late. The town, the so-called safe haven, was no refuge at all. The creatures were here. And this time, they weren't playing. I didn't think. There was no time to think. Only the overwhelming instinct to survive. The moment I saw that shadow in the doorway, blocking our only way into what I hoped might be safety, everything inside me screamed to turn and run. And run we did. Ethan, already ahead of us, was the first to react. He veered sharply to the left, pulling us away from the creature at the door. "We can't stay here." "Run," he yelled, his voice strained with fear. Sarah was right behind him, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her feet never faltered. I could hear her ragged breaths in the stillness of the night as we bolted down the empty street. My mind was a blur of panic, my heart pounding in my ears, as I turned back once more to look at the thing in the doorway. It didn't move at first. Its glowing eyes followed us, calculating, cold. And then, snap. The sound echoed through the street as it stepped forward, its long limbs creaking like old wood under pressure. "We have to get inside somewhere, anywhere." I shouted over my shoulder, but my voice felt weak, desperate. But as I turned back around, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The streets ahead of us weren't empty anymore. The creatures had already surrounded us. They were everywhere, standing in the shadows, flickering in and out of view like demons materializing from the darkness. Each one moved in its own twisted rhythm, their faces blank but their eyes, those eyes, burning with an empty, predatory hunger. Their long, unnatural limbs reached out from the darkness, as though they were drawn to the sound of our footsteps, to our fear. I had no doubt in my mind that we were trapped. The buzzing hum, that dreadful noise, filled the air again. It came from all around us, vibrating the ground beneath our feet, rattling our bones. They were closing in. Up ahead. Ethan yelled, pointing toward a building at the far end of the street. I didn't even look to see what kind of building it was. I just followed, pushing my legs harder, my feet pounding against the cracked pavement. My breath was coming in short gasps, but I didn't dare slow down. I didn't look back. I didn't have the courage to see how close they were, how many of them there were. We reached the building, a weathered old structure that looked like a church. The doors were partially ajar. Without thinking, Ethan yanked them open and we rushed inside. The heavy door slammed shut behind us, the sound ringing through the hollow interior. The moment we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air inside was thick, musty, almost suffocating. The walls were cracked, and the dusty pews looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The smell of old wood, mildew, and something else, something metallic, filled my nostrils. "Is this it?" Sarah asked, her voice strained as she glanced around the room. "Is this really safe?" Before anyone could answer, a loud bang echoed from the door. Then another. And another. The creatures were outside, slamming into the door, trying to break through. The door groaned under the pressure. I could hear the nails squeaking as they pulled free from the wood, the hinges creaking in protest. "We're not safe here," I muttered. "We need to find another way out." But as I turned to look for an exit, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the church, just behind the altar, stood a figure. It wasn't like the others. This one felt different. It was tall, impossibly tall, but this one didn't have the same twisted limbs. This one was human-shaped, its posture unnaturally still. Its face was obscured by a long, tattered cloak, but the eyes, those eyes, were visible, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was watching us. What are you?" Sarah's voice trembled as she took a step back. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, its eyes locked on us, a presence that felt ancient, knowing. It didn't move, but somehow, I felt like it was studying us, waiting for something. Then, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows at the far side of the church. One of the creatures had slipped inside. Then another. And another. They were in. And the figure, it moved. Slowly, but with a purposeful, predatory grace. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, staring at the figure, my thoughts clouded by the overwhelming sensation that this thing was the cause of everything that had been happening. Without warning, the figure raised one long, bony hand, and the air around us seemed to shift. I felt it in my bones, like a pressure building around my chest. The creatures stopped. They froze. They weren't moving anymore. They were just waiting. Then the figure spoke, its voice low and almost melodic, but it sent a chill crawling up my spine. "You should have turned back." The words hung in the air, their meaning heavy and suffocating. The door behind us splintered, and the creatures began to move again. But the figure didn't flinch. It didn't react. It just watched. And then it smiled. The smile wasn't human. It stretched far too wide, its mouth parting to reveal rows of jagged teeth that weren't meant to fit in a human skull. And just like that, I understood. We had never been meant to escape. We were never meant to survive this night. The smile on the figure's face was a nightmare made flesh. It wasn't just wide, it was unnatural, grotesque in its proportions. The teeth gleamed in the dim light of the church, sharp and uneven, more suited for tearing than smiling. I froze, staring at that wide, twisted grin, my heart pounding in my chest. The creatures behind us stopped their advance, waiting for a command. They didn't move, they didn't need to. The figure in the cloak had a power over them. I felt it, like an invisible weight pressing down on us, a suffocating force that left no room to breathe. "You should have turned back," it repeated, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to reverberate in my mind rather than my ears. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my legs shaking. I glanced at Ethan and Sarah. They were frozen too, their eyes wide with terror. What are you?" I managed to croak, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question, before answering in that same eerie, melodic voice. "I am the keeper of this place. The keeper of all roads that should never have been traveled." I felt the cold chill spread through my veins as it spoke. The words made no sense, and yet, they felt like they were seeping into my very soul. I couldn't understand how a figure, so unnatural, so wrong, could speak in such an unsettlingly calm way. The creatures shifted slightly, their hollow eyes fixed on us, but they didn't approach. It was as if the figure's presence held them back, kept them at bay. But I knew that wouldn't last long. We were cornered. Trapped. And the figure, it knew that. "This place," the figure continued, its hand slowly reaching out from under the cloak, "it was never meant to be found. You were never meant to be here." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was true, all of it. From the moment we started that road trip, it had felt wrong. The places we'd passed, the towns that had seemed abandoned, the creatures lurking in the shadows, it was all part of some twisted trap. But the worst part was yet to come. You are the last. The last to wander these roads. Once I take what is mine, there will be no more. The figure raised its other hand slowly, and I saw it now, the shadowy outline of the creatures behind it, waiting, poised to strike. There was no escaping now. The figure had no need for us to run. It wasn't hunting us. We were already its prey. A feeling of dread unlike anything I had ever experienced crawled over my skin. The atmosphere in the church seemed to thicken, the air becoming heavier, colder. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, tightening around my chest. "You think you can escape?" The figure's voice broke through my panicked thoughts. "The road always leads here. It always brings the lost souls back, to me." I stared, stunned, as it raised its arms high above its head. And then, the ground beneath us trembled. The walls groaned like they were alive, and the sound of shifting earth echoed through the church. I felt a pull, a strange magnetic force tugging at me. It was as if the very building itself wanted to swallow us whole. The creatures stepped forward now, moving slowly, like a well-rehearsed dance. Their eyes locked onto us, and I felt their hunger, their twisted desire to tear us apart. But they were still waiting for something. They were waiting for their master's command. "This is it," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is the end." Ethan's eyes were wide with terror. "There has to be another way. There has to be something we can do," but there wasn't. I knew it now. There was no escape. The figure was right. We had been drawn to this place, to this nightmare, from the very beginning. And now, we were part of its twisted story. I took a step back, trying to process the horror of it all, when suddenly, I felt something cold and sharp press against the back of my neck. I didn't need to look. I knew what it was. One of the creatures had snuck up behind me, its long, bony hand like ice against my skin. It made no sound, no movement. It was just there, a cold, malevolent presence that hung over me like a noose. I took another step back, trembling, but there was nowhere to go. The figure stepped forward now, closer, its cloak swirling around it like smoke. The air grew colder with every step it took. "It's too late," it said softly, almost pityingly. "You were never meant to leave." And then, with an abrupt motion, the creature behind me let out a low hiss and yanked me forward, pulling me away from the others. I stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden motion. But I knew, that if they had me, they would tear me apart. I had to escape. Somehow. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that might give us a chance. And then I saw it. At the far side of the church, just beyond the altar, there was a small, wooden door. It wasn't much, but it was the only way out. "Go!" I screamed at Ethan and Sarah. "We have to get to that door." Without waiting to see if they followed, I pushed through the creature's grip, twisting and squirming, my mind focused on that small door. The creatures snarled behind me, but I didn't look back. I could hear their footsteps, feel them closing in, but I couldn't stop now. I had to survive. The moment I reached the door, I wrenched it open with all my strength and stepped into the cold, moonlit night. The others followed, and together, we slammed the door shut, locking it behind us. But as we stood there, breathless, our backs pressed against the door, I knew the worst wasn't over. We had just escaped one nightmare, but something told me the road would never stop following us. And the creatures? They were still out there. Waiting. The road was calling again. And this time, I wasn't sure if we could outrun it. We stood in the cold night, gasping for breath, our hands trembling. The door behind us seemed to groan with every second, like it too, wanted to break free. But we didn't move. We didn't dare. I couldn't let go of the fear that gripped me. The creatures were still out there, waiting. The road that had led us here, was it really over? Had we escaped, or were we simply part of an even bigger, more twisted game? The moon hung overhead, casting long shadows over the town. It was eerily silent now, too silent. The growls, the scratching, the scraping of claws against metal and stone, had all stopped. But something told me it wasn't over. It never was. I turned to Ethan and Sarah. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, but we were all too scared to speak. There were no words for this. No comfort. Nothing to say that could make any of this feel real. Ethan wiped his brow, trying to collect himself. "What now?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What the hell just happened? Is it really over?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But I don't think we're safe yet." I turned back toward the town, my eyes scanning the buildings for any sign of movement. But nothing stirred. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, as though the town itself was holding its breath. My pulse quickened again, and I felt that pull, the same feeling that had led us into this nightmare. The road, it was still calling, somewhere deep in my gut. Sarah's voice cut through the silence, barely a whisper. "What if this place isn't real?" I stiffened, turning to face her. What do you mean? Her eyes were wide with a mix of confusion and fear. I mean, what if it's all just part of this place? Maybe we're not really here at all. Maybe it's another trap, another road we've been forced onto. The word struck me like a cold slap. Maybe she was right. What if we were already dead? What if the road, the town, the creatures, what if they were part of some twisted game, some cruel test where there was no escaping, no way out? I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, I knew the truth. We had been chasing our freedom, running from something we could never outrun. The road was not just a place, it was a trap. A never-ending loop. Suddenly, a low, deep sound echoed from behind us. It was the hum again, that eerie buzz that seemed to vibrate in the air, creeping into my bones, shaking me to the core. I froze, my body stiff, my blood turning cold. The creatures. They were back. I turned and saw them. Not just a few now, but dozens, no, hundreds, their dark forms spilling into the town, moving like a wave. They weren't running anymore. They were marching, deliberate and slow, as if they had all the time in the world. I felt the weight of the figure's words echo in my mind. The road always leads here. We hadn't escaped. We were just here. Trapped. Ethan grabbed my arm, his grip tight. We have to run. But where? There was nowhere to go. The creatures surrounded the town now. They were closing in, their eyes glowing, their twisted bodies moving with unnatural grace. We were trapped, the road behind us and the creatures ahead. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something happened. Something I still can't explain. The ground beneath us rumbled again. The sky above seemed to crack open, as though the world itself was splitting apart. And from the rift, I saw it, the road. It was opening up in front of us, stretching far into the distance, the same road that had brought us here. I don't know why, but something in me, some strange, uncontrollable force, pushed me toward it. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't stop it. My legs moved on their own, pulling me toward the rift in the earth. It felt like the road was calling to me, pulling me back into its fold. Come on. I screamed at Ethan and Sarah, but they didn't move. They were rooted to the spot, too afraid to follow. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran. The road stretched out in front of me, endless, winding, twisting through the dark expanse. The creatures were far behind me now, but I could still feel them, watching, waiting, their hunger lingering in the air like a sickening cloud. The rift in the earth closed behind me, sealing off the town, but I knew, it wasn't really gone. It never would be. I kept running. I didn't know if it was the right choice. I didn't know if I was escaping or walking deeper into the trap. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, because if I stopped, I might never wake up again. The road, like everything else, was a lie. And we were always meant to be part of its story. The hum faded as I ran, and the road stretched on, forever stretching, an endless loop. The road that never let go. I wasn't sure if I would ever truly escape. But I ran, because that's all there was left to do. And maybe, just maybe, the road would take me somewhere new, somewhere different. Or maybe, it would simply take me back to where it all began. The road was calling. And I had no choice but to answer.